Imagine a war machine standing as high as a 9-story building. This is the Helepolis, the taker of cities. A gigantic siege tower plated in iron, which required 3,400 men just to push it into battle. It embodied a miracle of engineering thought and instilled terror throughout the entire ancient world. The creator of this behemoth was considered invincible. The face of Demetrius I, the most beautiful man of the era, according to Plutarch, combined within itself heroism and beauty, frightening and attractive simultaneously. They nicknamed him Poliorcetes, the Besieger of cities, for his ability to crack open any wall. But the irony of history and its cruel mockery lies in the fact that this genius of the siege could not protect his own soul from destruction. He lost his kingdom not on the battlefield, but in the twilight of bedchambers and the clamor of banquet halls. This story tells of a man whose shoulders were draped in a cloak with the universe embroidered upon it, yet whose hands proved too weak to hold on to even a small Macedonia. In the previous cycle regarding the War of the Diadochi, we left the world lying in ruins. Previously, we watched as the old lion, Antigonus the One-Eyed, fell under a hail of javelins at Ipsus, betrayed by everyone except his son. We remember how the cunning Ptolemy hijacked Alexander's body and how the ruthless Cassander exterminated the entire royal dynasty. But Demetrius, the son of Antigonus, survived. He remained the last shard of the great dream of a unified empire. Today, we will trace his attempt to restore that past greatness. We are about to witness 5 acts of his personal drama, from saving a friend by carving a message on the sand with a spear, to the moment when an exhausted army refuses to follow orders, tired of his endless theater of a single actor. We will answer the key question: is a great conqueror capable of becoming a worthy ruler, or are his ambitions merely a wildfire that inevitably consumes the state itself? The lesson about actor leaders who confuse popularity with real power remains just as acutely relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. To understand the tragedy of Demetrius, one must look into his relationship with his father. In the world of the Diadochi, where sons poisoned fathers and brothers strangled brothers for the sake of power, the bond between Antigonus and his heir appeared to be an anomaly. It remained the only dynasty where family blood was not spilled. Old Antigonus, that very one-eyed titan, allowed his son to enter his tent with weapons in hand and did not even flinch. A story described by Plutarch eloquently confirms this trust. Once, Antigonus had a dream. He was sowing gold, while Mithridates, a friend of Demetrius, was harvesting the crop and fleeing toward Pontus. The one-eyed ruler, paranoid to the marrow of his bones, decided to eliminate the competitor immediately. He shared his plan with his son, having first sworn him to silence. Demetrius found himself facing a heavy choice: betray his parent or allow the death of his comrade. The young man found a solution worthy of a Greek tragedy. Taking Mithridates out for a walk, he stepped aside and with the point of his spear traced just 2 words on the sand: "Flee, Mithridates." This gesture reveals Demetrius the man to us: noble, perceptive, loyal. But the very ease with which he resolved such collisions would play a cruel joke on him when the stakes proved immeasurably higher than the life of a single friend. 307 BC. Demetrius solemnly enters the harbor of Pyrrhus with a fleet of 250 ships. The general does not simply conquer Athens, he liberates it from the tyranny of Cassander. It is here, in the cradle of democracy, that his transformation from warrior to actor begins. The Athenians, intoxicated by freedom and flattery, quite literally lose their minds. They proclaim Demetrius and his father as saviors, gods, soters. The popular assembly abolishes the office of the archon, naming the year after the hero. The most daring sacrilege occurs when the image of Demetrius is woven into the sacred peplos of the goddess Athena, right alongside Zeus himself. The prince perceives these honors not as a political game, but as reality. He takes up residence directly inside the Parthenon. The great temple becomes his personal living quarters. Demetrius declares that the goddess Athena is his older sister, whom he has dropped in on for a visit. However, he visits in a very peculiar manner. The sanctuary turns into a den for his hetairae, Lamia, Chrysis, and Demo. The Athenians shudder at the sacrilege, but keep their silence, paralyzed by fear. This was the peak of his pride, Hubris, blinded by divine grandeur. At this moment, Demetrius crushed Ptolemy's fleet at Salamis, capturing 120 ships and a vast treasury. But inside the brilliant admiral, a void was already maturing. He had lost the ability to see the boundaries between the sacred and the earthly. Demetrius embodied extremes. In the heat of war, he acted soberly, energetically, and brilliantly, emulating Alexander. But the moment peace arrived, the hero transformed into Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. He did not build a durable state, but rather grandiose stage sets. The famous Helepolis during the siege of Rhodes served not merely as a tool, it became a spectacle of intimidation. An iron tower 40 meters high loomed over the walls, invulnerable to fire. Even his enemies, struck by the majesty of the engineering thought, asked to preserve it as a monument after the siege concluded. Demetrius lived for applause, but he lost sight of the fact that scenarios in real life are not written by playwrights, but by opposing armies. The hero is at the summit of power. He possessed the title of king, commanded the most powerful fleet of 500 ships, and relied on his father's support. It seemed the empire of Alexander was about to be reborn under the banners of the Antigonids. But the ambitions of this pair united the entire world against them. We already know where these pretensions led: the plain of Ipsus. Dust, elephants, and blood. 80-year-old Antigonus waited for reinforcements. The old man peered through the horizon with his one eye, firmly believing that his son would return and save him. But Demetrius, carried away by the attack, pursued the enemy cavalry for too long, and when he turned his horses to strike the rear, an insurmountable barrier appeared before him. A wall of 400 war elephants belonging to Seleucus. 301 BC. The Battle of Ipsus is lost. Antigonus is dead, struck down by a hail of spears. The empire, built over decades, perishes under the onslaught of vultures, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Cassander. Demetrius retreats to Ephesus, preserving only a shadow of his former greatness: 5,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry. Just yesterday, he disposed of the fates of Asia. Today, he has turned into an exile. Ephesus held the remnants of the imperial treasury, and many expected that the king, like a cornered beast, would loot the temple of Artemis to pay his mercenaries. However, Demetrius acts otherwise. He leaves the sanctuary untouched, takes only the legitimate state funds, and leads the fleet out to sea. This is how a man acts who believes in a coming revenge and does not wish to burn bridges with the heavens. He places his main hope on Athens, the polis he once liberated and where he was honored with divine worship. There his triremes, gold, and wife Deodamia waited in anticipation. Demetrius sets a course for the Cyclades, doubting not a warm welcome. But an Athenian embassy sails out to meet him. The envoys speak words that wound more painfully than enemy steel. The people have passed a law to admit none of the kings into the city. The Athenians politely but adamantly return his fleet and wife to him, slamming the gates right in front of his nose. Those who yesterday wove his face next to Zeus, today proclaim neutrality. For Demetrius, this is not a dry political maneuver, but the deepest personal betrayal. The illusions collapsed. He realized the bitter truth. The loyalty of the crowd was purchased with triumphs. The moment luck turned away, the feelings of yesterday's fanatics evaporated instantly. The situation seems hopeless. Not a scrap of land, no loyal allies, no secure rear. But it is in this abyss that his natural gift reveals itself, the genius of survival. The commander refuses despair and tries on a new mask. If the land has rejected him, he will conquer the elements. Possessing the rescued treasury and the most powerful fleet in the world, Demetrius Poliorcetes transforms into history's first crowned arch-pirate. The ships become his mobile state. He attacks the majestic domains of Lysimachus in Thrace, ravages the coasts, and seizes enemy vessels. The king lives on the deck, feasts in the cabins, and brings terror to those who had already managed to divide his inheritance. Demetrius proves a paradox. A monarch does not necessarily need to own territory, as long as he has an army and an iron will. However, eternal wandering is impossible. Soldiers require ground beneath their feet, and ships require harbors. A staging ground is needed. And fate, as if in mockery, flings open the doors for him into the very heart of the hostile world, into Macedonia. Do you remember Cassander, that very executioner of the dynasty from our previous cycle? This man cold-bloodedly slaughtered the mother, wife, and son of Alexander the Great. He seemed to have outplayed everyone, yet he ended his life in agony. History loves irony. The empire created on blood began to crumble even before the tyrant's body had gone cold. By 294 BC, Macedonia is being torn apart by civil war. Cassander's sons, Antipater and Alexander V, have latched onto each other's throats. The latter makes a fatal mistake. In a panic, the youth prays for help from two of the most dangerous predators of the era, Pyrrhus of Epirus and our hero, Demetrius Poliorcetes. Alexander hopes for allies, but in reality he flings the gates open to wolves. Demetrius arrives in Macedonia. However, by this moment, the young king has already reconciled with his brother and realized the guest must be removed. Plutarch describes what happens next as a tense psychological thriller. An experienced predator and an inexperienced puppy meet, exchange greetings, feast together, but not for a moment do they remove their palms from the hilts of their swords. Both are plotting murder. Alexander plans to dispose of his rival right at the table, but Poliorcetes, having passed through the harsh school of the Diadochi, smells the scent of betrayal a mile away. On the day of the celebration in Larissa, Demetrius leaves the hall earlier than expected, citing illness. The terrified host jumps up to escort the guest to the exit, counting on an ambush at the threshold. But Demetrius strides in a tight ring of bodyguards. When they reach the doors, he throws a short phrase to his men. "Strike the one who follows me!" One blow, and Cassander's heir falls dead. His retinue is slaughtered immediately after. One of the dying men manages to gasp, "Demetrius, you beat us by only 1 day." Think about the situation. Poliorcetes has just finished off the legitimate ruler. he stands before the Macedonian phalanx, the very army that idolized Philip and Alexander. It would seem the soldiers should tear the outsider apart. But the incredible happens. Demetrius walks out to them, not with excuses, but with the bitter truth. "I killed the son of Cassander," he proclaims, "the one who exterminated the family of your great king." For the warriors, the choice is obvious. On one side, the degenerate offspring of a hated tyrant. On the other, a legendary hero, son of Antigonus the One-Eyed and husband of Phila, whose lineage gave him rights to the throne. The army raises its spears, acknowledging Demetrius as king. The circle has closed. The exile without land has secured the most prestigious kingdom in the world. But he never realized that Macedonia is not a trophy, but a responsibility. Poliorcetes gained the crown his father dreamed of. Now he possesses Macedonia, Thessaly, most of the Peloponnese, Athens, and Megara. He could have engaged in creation, healing the wounds of a country exhausted by 30 years of strife. But Demetrius did not know how to build. His vocation was the siege. And now, at the peak of greatness, his inner actor finally takes the upper hand. The strangest and shortest act of this drama begins. The theater of one king.
6 years have passed. Macedonia is exhausted. Demetrius is preparing a new, insane war. He dreams of reclaiming all of Asia. The king lays down the keels for a fleet of 500 ships, giants the likes of which history had never known before. However, at home, he behaves not like a Macedonian ruler, the first among equals, but like an Eastern idol. Look at his attire. Plutarch describes this with unconcealed disgust. Demetrius wears shoes of purple felt embroidered with gold. A double diadem adorns his head. But the main thing is his cloak, a grandiose mantle that was woven for years. The canvas depicted the entire universe, the stars, the sun, the moon, and the signs of the zodiac. He literally carried the cosmos on his shoulders. Stern Macedonian veterans, accustomed to seeing a leader in dust and blood, perceived this as a personal insult. But the regime's collapse did not come because of clothes. The cause was pride. Power is an unspoken agreement. The people serve as long as the king listens. Demetrius tore up this agreement. There is a scene that became the symbol of his fall. Once, in a rare fit of mercy, he agreed to accept petitions from common people. Demetrius walked down the street, carefully gathering the scrolls into the folds of his purple cloak. The people rejoiced. The king has finally heard us. The procession reached the bridge over the Axios River. Demetrius stopped, unfurled his mantle, and simply shook all the petitions out into the current. In that instant, he lost Macedonia, not on the battlefield, but on that bridge. In 288 BC, the inevitable arrives. Enemies attack from all sides. Lysimachus presses from the east, Ptolemy threatens from the sea, and the most dangerous opponent, Pyrrhus, advances from the west. Demetrius leads his army against the latter, and here, two different truths met. The soldiers look at Pyrrhus, a warrior who lives in a simple tent, shares bread with them, and fights in the vanguard. In him, they recognize a new Alexander. Turning back, they see their ruler, the actor king, in shoes worth thousands of drachmas, who threw their needs into the river. The Macedonian army refuses to fight. The soldiers issue an ultimatum: "Leave, or we will kill you." And then, Demetrius performs his final theatrical gesture. He enters his tent, strips off the cosmic garments, dons a simple dark cloak, and disappears into the night. like an actor who washed off his makeup after a failed performance and slipped out through the back door. The overlord has turned into a vagabond once again. But Demetrius did not know how to give up. With a handful of loyal men, he flees to Greece, recruits mercenaries, and builds a new fleet. He invades Asia, vainly attempting to repeat the path of his great namesake. The agony begins, the flight of a hunted beast. The exiled soldiers perish from hunger and fever in the Taurus Mountains. In the end, in 285 BC, exhausted and abandoned by everyone, he makes a choice. Demetrius does not throw himself upon his sword, as honor would dictate. He surrenders to his old enemy, Seleucus.
Recall Seleucus, the victor who started his path from practically zero. Now this master of Asia holds in his hands the man who once laid claim to world domination. Instead of execution, Seleucus chooses mercy, worthy of a true monarch. Demetrius awaits not a damp dungeon, but a luxurious residence on the Syrian coast. The best cooks, vast hunting grounds, shady parks, and exquisite wines. The captive is surrounded by blinding magnificence. The only thing he is deprived of is an exit. At first, the besieger tries to save face. He sends letters to his son, Antigonus Gonatus, urging him to ignore any orders coming from captivity. Consider that I am dead. The faithful Antigonus is ready for anything. He offers himself as a hostage and promises Seleucus all remaining lands in exchange for his father's freedom. But Seleucus hesitates. In high politics, a living but isolated Demetrius is worth far more than a dead hero. Over time, the prisoner's will fades. He had chances to escape, but he stopped looking for them, finally broken by the silence. The man of energy, who spent his whole life storming cities, capitulates before idleness. The golden cage turns into a comfortable grave. He seeks oblivion in wine and endless feasts, turning his sunset into a slow, boozy suicide. In 283 BC, after 3 years of seclusion, the organism of the 54-year-old giant gives up. Demetrius dies from excess and suffocating melancholy. But the finale of his life became his last triumphant spectacle. Antigonus meets his father's ashes in the middle of the Aegean Sea. A golden urn, crowned with a royal diadem, stands high on the stern of the flagship. To the chords of the famous flautist Xenophantus, the oars strike the water rhythmically, mimicking the rhythm of funeral sobbing. Even in death, the theatrical king remained true to himself. The curtain fell, truly beautifully. Demetrius Poliorcetes dedicated his life to storming impregnable strongholds and creating machines the likes of which the world had never seen. Yet he lost everything, not due to the fault of a weak army, but as a consequence of the luxury of his own cloak. The paradox of his fate is obvious. A man capable of crushing any fortress never built a bridge to his own people, the only obstacle that mattered. This reveals a harsh truth. The greatness of a ruler is measured not by the height of the throne, but by the depth of the roots. Power turned into theater inevitably ends in loneliness behind a lowered curtain. History continues to test anyone who confuses a crown with a prop with this very truth, from the ruins of Pella to modern palaces. However, the collapse of the actor king did not interrupt the flow of time, but merely prepared the stage for a force of a completely different order. While Demetrius was fading away in his golden cage, a man was gaining power in the West whom Hannibal himself would later call the greatest commander after Alexander. The world came to know him by the name Pyrrhus. The furious eagle of Epirus did not build towers and did not value silk. He was the first to challenge the growing shadow of Rome, turning his name into a symbol of victory that is more bitter than any defeat. We will tell you in the next chapter how a tactical genius wins battles but loses the campaign because of a roof tile thrown by an old woman. Subscribe to see the coming collision of Pyrrhus with the legions. Hit the like button if the tragedy of Demetrius made you think about the price of ambition. Share in the comments, did Demetrius have a chance for true greatness, or was he destined to remain an eternal runner-up? Thank you for watching. See you soon.